In this one lecture, I actually want to cover 3 principles under a heading for one principle. In the handout that I've given you, it refers to a principle called the unity of command. The unity of command. And I appreciate what the authors of FM3 are trying to get at when they describe the unity of command. But there's a way that the description of unity of command there is a kind of approach to strategy that is very imperialistic, where it's fine for you to talk about the importance of the unity of command if you're an empire and you have total control over your army and all of these resources. And by making that, I'm not trying to make a political statement. Rather, it's just a statement of reality. That's the perspective that particular description of unity of command is coming from. But I'm going to take that principle and break it down into 3 principles in this particular lecture. So let me first define the unity of command. The unity of command may be understood in this way. For every objective, ensure a unity of effort under one responsible commander. Again, for every objective, ensure unity of effort under one responsible commander. Now, as nice as that principle is, it actually is combining 3 other principles. And those principles are the principle of cooperation, the principle of communication, and the principle of obedience. Cooperation, communication, and obedience. Let me explain each of these, and in doing so, I'll be able also to tell you a number of stories to illustrate them. But first, the principle of cooperation. Let me define the principle of cooperation. Cooperation can be described as making sure all resources are summoned in tandem to the maximum strategic benefit. So, stated as a command, all resources must be summoned in tandem to the maximum strategic benefit. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, inherently, a force that's working on a particular problem has to work together. People must cooperate. And when they cooperate, when they work together, then they're actually summoning their resources to work together on the problem. But what happens when they don't cooperate? All of us in an organizational context have felt the pain of people on a team not cooperating. And this can have drastic consequences. And an example of this is Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2008. Hillary Clinton's leadership style was to bring together a group of people who were rivals, who would compete against each other, and in her organization, in their competing and fighting against each other, they would, at least in her mind, it would bring out the best in all of them. But in her particular campaign, there needed to be and we'll talk about this a little bit later, a communication of information inside the organization so that everybody who was helping her could actually be effective. And that didn't happen. A lot of infighting occurred, and a number of decisive opportunities were lost. If you're curious about this, you can read the book Game Change, which describes this. But this is the principle of cooperation. If you're going to be successful, there must be cooperation. And oftentimes in organizational life, there are factions that develop where there is infighting. And sometimes the decisive local objective, if you follow my earlier discussion of the private on the beach, may be you focusing on fixing the relationship of cooperation so that you can actually get things done. That's the principle of cooperation. Next is the principle of communication. Communication. Let me define communication. Communication can be understood this way. Decisive action must not reach beyond its supply line. Decisive action must not reach beyond its supply line. Now, what do I mean by this? I trust you see that communication in this sense is not communication as in, hey, I'm talking with you. Rather, communication is when we communicate resources from one place to another. Any particular objective is going to require supplies. It may be money, it may be personnel, it may be food. But whatever it is, we have to make sure that that resource, could be information, is transferred from one location to another. If you go beyond these supply lines, excuse me, if you go beyond these supply lines, the resources needed to accomplish the objective are lost, and you fall into a strategic paralysis, which means that much of operational work is cultivating the resources necessary to accomplish a certain objective, which may mean in organizational life you have to be friends with people and socialize with them, as opposed to being the person who just focuses on work, 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 work. One of my colleagues, recently we had a national, I think it's Poem in the Pocket Day, where he was walking around taking a poem and putting it in the pockets of people who are around the the hallways of our department here. Well, now that's a fun thing to do, but you see that in that little action, he's actually building communication. He's building relationships with people so that so that they understand him and his care for them as not just him focused on his goals, but actually wanting to have community and relationship with them. That's practicing the principle of communication. Okay. So notice I'm understanding communication more broadly than simply just the transfer of information. Finally is the principle of obedience. Obedience is a strange thing because we don't think obedience is very important in the 21st century. Obedience is even a bad word, right? We should be collaborating. I shouldn't have to obey an authority. But obedience is critical to the success of any mission. If we are to be successful, we must obey. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me define obedience.